All right, so as David described, we have this problem that users don't get indicators of comparability, and even if they know something to be false, there isn't much they can do about it. So we thought about exploring the potentials of three design affordances that David just introduced, and we believe that these three affordances can be incorporated into social media platforms easily. But first, we wanted to see if there are needs for these affordances, and just to reiterate, the affordances are to allow any users to assess any content as accurate or inaccurate, and to allow them to specify who they trust to assess content for them, and to also give them filters that they can use to filter their feed based on accuracy assessments provided by their trusted sources. Okay, so to understand if there are needs for these affordances, we surveyed a diverse set of more than 190 users about their current practices using and about the current practices sharing and reading online news and content. And we found that over 80% of users encounter content that they know to be false, at least occasionally. And they judge these pieces of information as false based on various rationales. For example, because they have domain knowledge on the subject, or because they have first-hand knowledge. For example, one participant says that I used to have a role in government and I would see news stories that I knew were inaccurate because they were about meetings where I had been present. And sometimes people's exposure to misinformation resulted from their intentionally following variable, unreliable sources for various reasons. For example, just because they wanted to see what the other side is saying. And we found that the majority of users attempt to correct the misinformation that they find online, and they do so by reporting these misinforming posts to the platforms, or by even reaching out to publishers sometimes. And a lot of times they do that by repurposing platform features that are intended for other purposes. For example, they share content that they know to be false just to add their own commentary to it and warn the users of inaccuracies. But then here's the catch. Because sharing is also often viewed as a signal, as a sign of endorsement, some users refrain from sharing content that they know to be false, even if it's to warn the others. So there's this missed opportunity here. And many users said that their friends and family rely on them to assess assess content that they find online. For example, one person said, my parents often ask me about medical information they see or health recommendations. I do research and try to distill conclusions from peer-reviewed articles into everyday terms. And many also said that they ask for the assessments of their friends or rely on them to correct them should they ever post inaccuracies. We also found that many users invest effort into creating a feed of reliable content on social media. And for example, they do that by trying to train the feed curation algorithm. As one participant said, I remove offending articles from my feed in the hope that the algorithm picks up my hints. These observations suggest that it shouldn't be assumed that all users are mere passive consumers who fall prey to misinformation and who should be saved, but rather that they treat online content with scrutiny and they can be recruited to help out each other. And in fact, this is what they're already doing, but without system support. In the same survey, we asked participants to imagine a filter that would block out misinformation from their feed. And then we asked for their perceptions of such a filter and their ideas for improving it. But the majority of participants actually interpreted this question as, or this filter as one that would be managed by the platforms, and were vehemently opposed to ceding the power of content moderation to platforms. As one participant said, how could I rely on filter? Who would be setting the parameters? As is what Facebook and Twitter do to fix the problems on their platforms. I would never use anything they had to offer. It's like 1984 coming to life. Some said that a filter that automatically blocked content would always carry the biases of its designers, and they weren't sure that they would necessarily trust the designers of such a filter. As one said, I need to evaluate all sources, good, bad, ugly. I don't want some fuzzy-faced tech whiz or algorithm written by a university indoctrinated progressive doing for me, of a MAGA partisan for that matter. Users also discussed that there were benefits to seeing unreliable content in their feed. For example, one was that so that they could be aware of what their friends and family are exposed to, so that they know how to talk to them. But those who imagined that this would be a filter that they could control liked the idea. And they had also ideas for such a filter. For example, one was that unreliable content would be flagged as such, but kept in their feed. So in summary, this survey revealed that there is indeed a need for the affordances that we're envisioning, and for streamlining the processes that users are already following on social media, but without system support. But to put these affordances to test and find out how users would interact with them and use them if given the opportunity, we built a social content sharing platform that we call TrustNet. And TrustNet is Facebook-like and incorporates these affordances that I described earlier. And it allows users to follow each other. By following another user, you'll be able to see what they post or share, and also allows users to post or share content. One of the things that is different on this platform compared to the existing social media is that it allows users to assess any content as accurate or inaccurate, or to ask about the accuracy of any content. And these assessments and questions are captured and displayed in a structured way. And another affordance is that users can explicitly mark other users as trustworthy. And this is for now captured privately. So if Alice trusts Bob, Bob wouldn't know that Alice trusts them. Okay, so this screenshot shows a feed of posts on this platform as is presented to a user. All the posts appear with indications of how they were assessed and by whom. So for example, all these stories have been assessed as accurate by some and as inaccurate by others, and users can see these assessments from the sources they follow or trust. And the user can also get to expand the assessments to see the reasoning that these sources have brought in support of the assessments that they've given to the posts. The platform also provides a filter that users can use to narrow down the posts on their feed. And among other things, the filter allows users to configure two things: what kind of accuracy assessments have been given to posts and by whom. For example, the user can choose to see only those articles that have been confirmed by their trusted sources, or those posts that have on which there's a disagreement on by some specific sources that they follow or trust. Okay, so as I mentioned, users can assess any post as accurate or inaccurate, but they can also ask about the accuracy of posts. They can disclose their name when asking questions, or choose to ask a question anonymously. And by default, these questions about accuracy of posts get surfaced to the user's trusted sources by default. But the user can also choose to ask for answers from specific people, even those who are not on TrustNet. And the arbiters, or the people who get these requests, are notified, receive notifications, and once they provide their assessments, the user is notified of the response. Actually, these assessments have the added benefit that anybody who comes across the post can see those assessments because they're just displayed in a structured way. But if they trust or follow the assessors, so there wouldn't be any need for duplicated effort. A decision we made in the platform was to require users to assess or ask about the accuracy of a piece of content before we allow them to share it. And this decision is actually tied to our earlier work, where we found that asking users to assess content before sharing it reduces their likelihood to share misinformation. Okay, so we wanted to see, let me actually, so this is a demo that I've brought here. And this is how you assess a post or else ask about its accuracy. This is for specifying people by email who are not on TrustNet. You can limit sharing to specific people. And this is how to interact with the filter. Okay. Sorry. Okay. We wanted to see how users would interact with the system and the affordances that were offered via the system. So we ran a user study with 14 participants over the course of the week. And these participants joined the study with at least one person from their social circle, friend, family, or colleague. And the reason we asked people to join the study with at least one person from the social circle was that because assessments in our system rely on trust. And this was motivated by the survey, where we found that users serve as trusted associates to others and also ask for and receive fact-checking information from the people they trust. So we couldn't just bring in random users who didn't know each other and expect that they would trust each other. And the daily tasks for the study involved sharing at least 2 posts a day, which meant that they had to assess it because to be able to share, a user has to assess the article or the post. And we also required that users check out their feed at least once a day. So we found that users actually valued the affordances that the system were offering, including the trust-based feeds, the vetting posts before sharing, and also having the filters to seek out different posts depending on how they were assessed. We found that users use different filter settings, and some people studied such that they would only ever see content that was confirmed by their trusted sources, and some chose to have everything in their feed, but nevertheless appreciated that they could get indications of content credibility, the assessments on the posts. And some specifically sought out posts that had disagreements on them by the people they trusted. Users also valued the ability to ask about the accuracy of content, and we saw that they used the feature as intended. They especially valued the anonymous feature. We also saw examples of participants. For example, here, what I brought on the slide is an example of a participant who asks about the accuracy of an article that required medical expertise to assess, and another participant who had an MD degree assessed it for them. So the structured trust affordance that the platform offers captures the trust relationships that people have already developed, via other channels outside a trusted platform. But it would also be interesting to see if the emphasis on accuracy and credibility, and also the available assessment history from everyone, would encourage users to rethink their trust relationships. Either by doubting somebody that they previously deemed trustworthy, or by adding somebody new to their list of trusted associates. And we actually saw that this is indeed the case. The first quote is from a participant who started following sources but not trusting them in the beginning, because they just wanted to see what posts they share and what assessments they post, and over time decide if they were trustworthy. And the second is an example of a participant deciding that another participant was not trustworthy based on a question that the latter asked. So in summary, capturing assessments and trust relationships as structured metadata can empower users in their fight against misinformation. And from both the survey and the user study, we determined that people want to contribute to this fight, and they are actually already doing so. It's just that their efforts are not supported by the platforms and even sometimes undermined by them. And we also showed that it's kind of easy to incorporate these affordances in any social media platform, as we did. Okay, what do we do? What do we do now? Where do we take this? Should we launch our own website and then ask users to migrate to it? Well, it's not going to be feasible, first of all, because it comes with a huge development cost. And second, we have this network effect on the social media platforms, where users will remain part of the network just because their friends and family are there. And we can't integrate these affordances with the existing social media like Facebook either, because their APIs are closed. Okay, so what's the solution? We thought about bringing some of the core features of trust, like assessments, to users as they're doing their normal web browsing on the websites that they usually consume. So we made a Chrome extension that we call the Trust extension, and it allows users to assess any page in situ without having to leave the page and going inside the trusted platform and assess it there. And it allows users to assess any page that has a URL or any content that has a URL. That means YouTube videos, tweets, news articles, Facebook posts, anything really. So how does this help? If a user is on a page that has been assessed by the people they trust or follow, they get the assessments of those people on the page in the corner. And then it has the potential, the assessments have the potential to warn the user if they're on a page with misinformation. And the good thing is that all these assessments go into the trusted platform, so users can see the assessments on their trusted feed as well. And vice versa, all the assessments made on a trusted platform for a particular web page or content is also viewable if users visit that content outside the platform. Okay, so research has shown that people simply often skim headlines, for example, on their social media feeds or news aggregators without actually clicking through the headlines, and their information consumption just comes from skimming those headlines. So if you only show the assessments of a page when the user is actually on the page, this would not benefit a lot of those users who don't actually visit the page. So another thing the extension does is that it looks at all the links that on the page the user is viewing, and if there's any assessments on those links by those users, but by those that the user trusts or follows, or any questions about the accuracy of those links by those that trust the user, it indicates those using icons next to the links. For links that have been assessed as inaccurate, it goes a step further and visually fades them. Like this is a link that has been assessed as inaccurate, and this, I'm not sure if you can actually see it because it's very faded, is also a Facebook post that has been assessed as inaccurate. Having indications of content credibility next to links before the user even visits them helps with this phenomenon that has been reported in the body of research on misinformation, that initial misconceptions can be hard to fix, even if after people have been exposed to a piece of content, they are presented with fact-checking or correcting misinformation. So this is a relatively new tool, and we haven't done a user study on it, but we're planning to do one soon. Okay. And here's a demo of the tool. As you can see, these pieces of content have been assessed as inaccurate. Some others were assessed as inaccurate. And when you visit a page that has been assessed, then you get the assessments in the corner. And here's the user assessing the page as inaccurate. Okay. All right. But a common problem is with misinformation, or actually content that is not fully accurate or credible, is the case of news headlines. We see that a lot of news headlines are clickbait or are sensationalist. They might misrepresent the article by cherry picking bits of information from the article, and they might even be misleading. So sometimes the intended goal for these headlines is to attract user clicks because the publishers run on ad revenue, and sometimes these manipulation techniques are employed by malicious actors because they want to disinform the public and manipulate their opinion. And here we have the same problem as I described before, that people just don't click on the headlines. Their information consumption comes from headlines. And there's also evidence in the body of research on misinformation that even if users do click on the article and ultimately read the article, they're more likely to retain the message that was presented in the headline, even if it disagrees with the content of the article. Okay, so to help with this problem, we made another Chrome extension that we call Reheadline, which when you're on an article's page, detects the headline and allows you to suggest an alternative headline for it. And then when you're on an article, you're on a page that has the original headline for which you or somebody you trust or follow has suggested an alternative, then the original headline is crossed out and the alternative headline is placed right next to it. And this could happen anywhere on social media feeds, for example here, or on the articles page on the news sources homepage, anywhere. And the extension also allows you to see the other alternative headlines that have been suggested for the headline, but one is only ever chosen for placement in situ based on a set of factors. And here I have another demo of Reheadline. Yeah, the user can suggest multiple alternate headlines for an article. Yeah, and then the original headline is crossed out once it's found on a page. All right, so the extensions work reasonably well, but they're basically taking over social media feeds and news websites in a hostile fashion without support or compliance support from those platforms or compliance from them. And they use a variety of heuristics to figure out which elements were and what they need to change. But if the rendered page changes drastically, then they can break and stop working. And they also have this limitation that they don't work on mobile, and that is where many people read news. So really, we need a better way of integrating new functionalities into existing social media platforms. Another type of challenge that we've been facing in this line of work is, what I mentioned before, the network effects. We don't know, we still don't have a good idea of how to get users to use these tools. And the main problem is because for these tools to be useful to people, they have to bring in a critical mass of their social media, their social circles within those within the platforms that they are already part of, into our platforms. And they shouldn't be using these tools for a day or two, but over a reasonably long periods, so that we could measure effects. And we're investigating different paths forward. We have initiated efforts to bring in journalists to use these tools for the benefit of the public. And we've been thinking about deploying these tools in classroom settings. And we've also been thinking about having institutions like MIT vet and assess content. And now I'll hand it over to David to discuss some of the broader implications of this ecosystem.
Can you just switch back to me for a sec? Jump forward too.
You have to slide forward.
There we go. I think that they've desynchronized. But just a couple of other questions to toss out before the Q&A. One is whether this whole idea of allowing everybody to do their own assessments and just pay attention to who they trust is going to empower filter bubbles, right? This phenomenon where people only hear one side of the story because that's the only thing that their friends talk about. We recognize this as a risk. We think this might actually be a good risk to take, though. There's an interesting article that claims Twitter is epistemically better than Facebook because it offers something called epistemic respite. Basically, it's nice to have a place where you can go where you're not having your beliefs challenged all the time. And that can give you the energy to then go and have your beliefs challenged when you're ready. And so my hope is that making people feel like they are in control of their information space and are not going to be deluged with misinformation being pushed at them by the platforms, that might make them more willing to look at debatable content and decide whether they want to believe it or not. We also think we can use the structured assessments to break filter bubbles. They mean, for example, that if somebody is surrounded by misinformation, we can find the one person who they trust who believes the contrary, and we can surface that other opinion, and it's coming from somebody who they trust, so that we have a better hope of convincing them to take another look at the question. Now, around the browser extension, and specifically the Reheadline platform, it's interesting to think about whether there are any issues with allowing people to mess up other people's web pages, right? So we've talked to some journalists and they're like, oh, well, I wouldn't want to change some other journalist's headline. That doesn't seem right. And in fact, years ago, it came in the wrong order, there was a tool called Third Voice. That came about same time as we started researching annotation, which allowed people to just put notes on arbitrary web pages. And I thought this was pretty cool. But content providers really didn't think it was cool, right? And they actually started a whole movement to make Third Voice stop, and eventually Third Voice failed. because people didn't like getting their websites defaced. I don't think of this as defacement. I think of this as individual user autonomy to signal to their friends things about this page, but I think it's an interesting question. All right, so that's it for our misinformation segment, and we can open up for Q&A to Farnaz about that.
So I think your comment, David, about a journalist would not want to change another journalist's headline is interesting, because journalists rarely get to write their own headlines anyway. Right. So I would think they might want to band together.
I actually thought they might want to change their own headlines.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Or maybe they could pair up and change each other's headlines. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess one question I have, which is, I guess, partly a question to Farnaz, but it's also just a question about the whole approach. So if you want to delay it till the end, we can do that. But I was wondering, to what extent do you want to focus only on empowering individual users, or would you want to try to inspire collective responses by users?
Farnaz, do you have thoughts about that?
Well, this is a path forward that we've been examining recently. We've been having discussions to enable, for example, institutions like MIT or a collective set of journalists assess content that is like vetted by this institution or by this collective. And I think the tool actually can enable people to do so. It's just that we just have to think about like the broader implications.
Yeah, because I don't know, when you said something about like you want to encourage like the right kind of filter bubbles, I was thinking that to some extent, don't Facebook groups enable that? Like people could form a Facebook group in which there's a lot of, sort of policing of like the rules for what you're allowed to post and what you're not allowed to post. And anyway.
Yeah, you can definitely imagine creating these kinds of proxy sources that integrate information from multiple individuals to give a consensus perspective give a consensus fact check, right? So MIT might want to just accept a fact check from any MIT faculty member, and that becomes a fact check by MIT and appears in the TrustNet platform, right? Or MIT might want to be careful and sort of use a majority vote among the MIT faculty who have assessed that post, or other kinds of rules like that.
Okay, so do we have any other questions for Farnaz? Yes.
Hi, Farnaz. Great work. I had a question, particularly again about the point that I think David brought about later, which was just around like cliques of users, kind of like only relying on people that maybe have the same opinions as them, and not really like being open to hearing other points of view. And I guess one of the questions I had was, so I mean, in the context of, I guess, climate disinformation, I'm aware that people who are sort of dismissive of climate change as being real, like, actually it's better to leave them alone and to like not try and talk to them, and it's better to just like, that group is not as important to the picture as the people who are sort of more on the fence. And I guess my question was, did you compare this approach of just having users relying on their local networks to actually having people talk to, say, a group of experts? So you were talking about how you're thinking about this collective, but in the experiment you ran out, I guess I'm curious if you, in your survey, if you like spoke to people and said, were they open to maybe hearing from an expert as opposed to somebody in their local network?
Well, we haven't done that, but I know of actual research. I know of many papers that have investigated they've compared people's receptiveness of fact-checking information presented by, experts, people in the position of authority, or their local network. Well, so research is actually not very conclusive about that. There are contexts in which, people who are experts are, or their opinions are like viewed, or they their opinions are taken by users, but there's also other work that suggests that people in general seem to be more receptive to what their friends tell them or the fact-checking information from their friends as opposed to from strangers. So I think that is something that needs more work. But one thing I just wanted to say is that the platform allows people to trust anybody, not just those that they immediately know. So you could imagine that, if there are experts on the platform, then people can trust them and then get their assessments.
Okay, so I believe that Aloni is attending remotely and has a question. Am I right about that? Aloni, unmute yourself.
Yeah, you are right. Hi.
Hi, I'm so
Yeah.
glad you could make it.
Me too. This is all very interesting. And hi, everybody over there. So I had a question about, I think it's about both of these projects, not Squadbox, both of the more recent projects. But I'll frame it around the headline. I think there's a sort of a different story that one could tell, and I'm not well versed in research, so I might be making this story up, about misinformation, which is that centralized traditional authorities on what is true and what is false are losing power, and that people on social media get to make their truth and spread it. And so I guess my question is, why there seems to be implicit in the idea of reheadline this idea that giving people more power to rewrite the news will tend to make headlines more accurate and not less accurate. And I wonder why we think that.
Okay, so we don't
or maybe I'm
think
wrong. Maybe that's not an assumption. So either way, thank you.
You're absolutely right. We did a user study on this, and we saw many people actually changed headlines for the better. They made them less clickbait. They added even, contextual information to the headlines that they thought were necessary, or just made them like better headlines for people who maybe didn't know much about the subject. And some people added their own biases. That's what we found. And then, we ran another study where we gave this set of generated headlines by the first set of users. And then we asked users which ones they preferred. Did they prefer the original headlines or the suggested alternates? And it turns out that people are actually can distinguish between what we call good headlines and bad headlines. If the headlines added the biases of the user, people didn't prefer them as much.
Okay, so actually I'd like to just have one more question and then take our 5-minute break, because I want to make sure that we save enough time at the end for all the integration that David has in mind. So who's the lucky questioner?
Thank you so much. This is a really interesting idea. I love the idea of an extension that just sits on everything, and you can go in and it shows you what your friends or trusted people are saying. I have 2 follow-up questions, kind of similar to what Aloni was asking. The first is, could you comment on the demographics of both of your studies, specifically with respect to economic status, education, political affiliation? And the second question is, who determines who is an expert on your platform?
Okay, so with respect to the demographics, we acknowledge that the demographics may have been skewed. It's usually hard to recruit people on the right. We did have users who were on the right, but it's just that we had more of the users on the left. Actually, the demographics, the particulars of the demographics are in the papers for both, and I can send you pointers to those. Sorry, I forgot the second question.
The second was, who decides what are experts? Who decides who's an expert on the platform?
It's just up to every individual. I mean, if so we give them the power to follow people, and then over time, if they see that, for example, their suggested headlines are an improvement over the original, then maybe they get to trust them and then see their headlines. So it's just up Sorry, David, yeah, you want to add?
I'll just add that there's an aspiration here, right? Our tools keep a record of all of your assessments. And our hope is that over time, people will be able to observe the assessments of people that they trust and discover that those assessments are often wrong and maybe they shouldn't trust that person. Or if they're considering trusting somebody new, they can look at the history of assessments and discover that person often assesses accurately. But this is aspirational. We have to prove it through experiment.
On the slide, there was an example of an expert that isn't your friend. Is that the case, or is it just people you know?
Oh no, trust is completely different from follow.